Welcome back to Old Songs Remix. The 1970s gave birth to something the world had never seen. A sound so infectious, so unstoppable, that it didn't just fill dance floors, it built them. Disco wasn't just music, it was a movement. It was glitter balls, platform shoes, and nights that never ended. And tonight, we're bringing 20 of the greatest disco songs of the 1970s back to life, remixed, reimagined, and ready to move you all over again. Let's turn back the clock. Song number 1, Stayin Alive, Bee Gees. The Bee Gees weren't always disco kings. In fact, by 1974, the brothers Gibb were considered washed up. Their early folk-pop sound had gone stale, and they were barely scraping by. Then Robert Stigwood asked them to contribute to a little film called Saturday Night Fever. Barry Gibb discovered he could sing in falsetto, almost by accident, while recording in a French studio. That discovery didn't just save their career. It defined an era. But here's what most people don't know. The Bee Gees wrote Stayin Alive in just a few days at a studio in France, working with producer Albie Galoutin and engineer Carl Richardson. The famous bass line, that pulsing, heartbeat-like groove, was actually recorded as a drum loop before drum loops even existed. They literally spliced 2 bars of tape together and played them over and over to create the rhythm track. Barry, Robin, and Maurice then layered their voices on top, with Barry's falsetto leading the charge. The result was a song that spent 4 weeks at number 1 and became the defining sound of an entire cultural moment. Saturday Night Fever would go on to sell over 40 million copies, and Stayin Alive would become the song that anyone who lived through the 70s could identify in 3 notes. The title itself was a statement of survival. The Bee Gees had survived their own decline. Disco was surviving the critics who called it disposable, and the characters in the film were surviving the grind of everyday life. That's why the song still resonates today. It's not just a dance track, it's an anthem of persistence. Song number 2, Boogie Wonderland, Earth, Wind and Fire. Earth, Wind and Fire was already a powerhouse when Maurice White invited a young vocal group called The Emotions to sing on what would become Boogie Wonderland. The song was inspired by the underground disco scene in Chicago, where White watched people escape their daily struggles on the dance floor. That escape, that pure, sweaty joy, is exactly what the track captures. But the story goes deeper. Maurice White had been a session drummer at Chess Records in Chicago before forming the band, playing on records by Etta James, Muddy Waters, and Buddy Guy. He brought that deep blues and R&B foundation into everything Earth, Wind and Fire recorded. By the time they reached Boogie Wonderland, they were already one of the most successful bands in America. But White was relentless about pushing the boundaries of what disco could be. He incorporated African rhythms, jazz harmonies, and funk grooves into a genre that critics dismissed as shallow and commercial. The collaboration with The Emotions was no accident. White had been mentoring the 3 Hutchinson sisters for years, and he specifically wrote the female vocal parts with their harmonies in mind. The result was a conversation between 2 groups at the peak of their powers. The song's production was famously complex. White used a kalimba, a thumb piano from Africa, as a textural element buried in the mix, and the horn arrangements were written by Tom Tom 84, a legend in his own right. Boogie Wonderland wasn't just a disco hit, it was a statement that disco could be musically sophisticated, culturally rich, and undeniably fun, all at the same time. It earned Earth, Wind and Fire a Grammy and cemented their place as one of the most important bands of the decade. Song number 3, I Will Survive, Gloria Gaynor. Gloria Gaynor recorded I Will Survive as a B-side. A B-side. The label didn't believe in it, but DJs in New York clubs flipped the record over and started playing it. And within weeks, it became an anthem of resilience that transcended disco. Gaynor herself said she recorded it in a single take, channeling real pain from a painful divorce. The emotion you hear? That's not performance. That's truth. But the full story is even more remarkable. The song was written by Freddie Perrin and Dino Fakaris, who had been struggling to get anyone to record it. Multiple artists turned it down before Gaynor agreed, and even she was initially unsure about it. She walked into the studio having just recovered from surgery and a serious back injury that left her partially paralyzed for weeks. She was literally standing in the vocal booth in pain when she delivered the performance that would define her career. The arrangement was deliberately sparse, a walking bass line, subtle strings, and a vocal that builds from quiet determination to full-throated defiance. The record company released it as the B-side to Substitute, a song they thought would be the hit. But the disc jockeys knew better. They flipped the record, and I Will Survive took on a life of its own. It climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in March 1979 and stayed there for 3 weeks. What made the song truly immortal, though, was what happened after disco died. When the disco backlash of the early 1980s wiped out dozens of careers, I Will Survive survived. It was adopted by the women's movement, the LGBTQ+ community, and anyone who had ever been knocked down and gotten back up. The Library of Congress added it to the National Recording Registry in 2016, one of the few disco songs to receive that honor. Gloria Gaynor went from being a one-hit disco diva to being the voice of survival itself.
First I was afraid, I was petrified, kept thinking I could never live without you by my side. You take me to funky town, won't you take me to funky town?
Song number 4, Funky Town, Lips Inc. Lips Inc. was a one-hit wonder, but what a hit. Funky Town was written by Stephen Greenberg in Minneapolis, inspired by his desperation to escape the Midwest for a real disco city. The lead vocalist, Cynthia Johnson, was a former Miss Black Minnesota who nailed the vocal in just a few takes. That hypnotic synth riff? It was one of the first uses of a vocoder in a pop hit, and it changed dance music forever. But the creation of the song was anything but glamorous. Greenberg was washing dishes at a Minneapolis restaurant when the melody came to him. He was living in a tiny apartment, playing in local bands that went nowhere, and dreaming of moving to New York or Los Angeles, a funky town where the music scene was alive. He wrote the lyrics as a personal manifesto, a plea to be taken somewhere more exciting. The vocoder, that robotic, futuristic voice that opens the track, was Greenberg's idea. He had been experimenting with electronics and synthesizers, and he wanted something that sounded like nothing else on the radio. Cynthia Johnson was brought in because Greenberg needed a powerful female vocal to cut through the dense electronic production. She was a singer who had won the Miss Black Minnesota pageant and performed locally, but she had never recorded anything that reached beyond the Twin Cities. Her performance on Funky Town was electrifying, soulful, commanding, and perfectly suited to the track's driving energy. The song was released in early 1980 and hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May, staying there for 4 weeks. It topped the charts in 28 countries and became one of the last great disco hits before the genre's commercial decline. But its influence didn't end with disco. The vocoder and electronic production techniques Greenberg pioneered on Funky Town directly influenced the development of house music, techno, and electronic dance music in the decades that followed. Every time you hear a robotic voice on a dance track, you're hearing the echo of Funky Town.
Won't you take me to funky town? Won't you take me to funky town?
Song number 5, Dancing Queen, ABBA. ABBA recorded Dancing Queen in 1975, and Benny Andersson later called it the song he was most proud of in their entire catalog. The inspiration came from George McRae's Rock Your Baby, which gave Björn Ulvaeus the idea to write something with that same floating, euphoric feel. When it was played at a royal gala in Sweden before its release, even the King of Sweden got up to dance. The Queen of Sweden stayed seated, but the King? He couldn't resist. But the full story behind Dancing Queen reveals just how meticulously ABBA worked. The song went through multiple drafts and arrangements before the band settled on the version the world knows today. Benny Andersson spent weeks refining the piano intro, that cascading, descending figure that sets the mood before any vocal enters. He wanted it to feel like stepping onto a dance floor for the first time. Tentative, then confident, then euphoric. Agnetha Fältskog and Anni-Frid Lyngstad recorded their vocals separately, as was ABBA's custom, and their voices were then layered together to create the lush, angelic harmonies that define the chorus. The production was handled by Michael B. Tretow, ABBA's longtime engineer, who used a technique called double tracking, recording the vocals twice and layering them slightly out of sync to create a thicker, richer sound. The lyrics, written by Björn Ulvaeus and their manager Stig Andersson, were deliberately simple and universal. A 17-year-old girl on a dance floor, lost in the music, living in the moment. But that simplicity was strategic. Ulvaeus has said that he wanted the words to feel like they could apply to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And they did. Dancing Queen became ABBA's only #1 hit in the United States, topped the charts in 13 countries, and has been played at more weddings, parties, and celebrations than anyone can count. It remains the song that defines ABBA's legacy, a perfect 3 minutes of pop euphoria that has never aged a single day.
You're a teaser, you turn it on, leave him burning and then you're
Song number 6, Rasputin, Boney M. Boney M was the brainchild of German producer Frank Farian, the same man who would later create Milli Vanilli. But unlike that later scandal, Boney M's lead vocalist Liz Mitchell actually did sing. Rasputin was banned in the Soviet Union for making light of Russian history, which only made it more popular underground. The song's bizarre blend of disco and Russian folklore was dismissed as novelty until it sold over 10 million copies. But the story of Boney M is more complex than most people realize. Frank Farian had been a struggling singer in Germany when he decided to create a group that could compete with the slick, American-produced disco acts dominating European charts. He assembled Boney M as a visual concept, 4 charismatic performers, Bobby Farrell, Marsha Barrett, Liz Mitchell, and Maisie Williams, who would become the face of the group while Farian provided the male vocals in the studio. The female vocals were sung live by Mitchell and Barrett. This arrangement was common in European pop production at the time, though it would later become controversial. Rasputin was the standout track on their 1978 album, Night Flight to Venus, and it told the heavily fictionalized story of Grigory Rasputin, the mystic who wielded enormous influence over the Russian royal family in the early 20th century. The lyrics were a mix of historical fact and wild exaggeration, set to a driving disco beat with a balalaika-inspired guitar riff. Soviet authorities banned the song immediately, but bootleg copies flooded the black market, and it became an underground hit behind the Iron Curtain. The song's appeal was its sheer audacity. It took one of the darkest figures in Russian history and turned him into a disco dance number. Bobby Farrell, the group's male dancer and frontman, performed Rasputin with such theatrical intensity that audiences in Europe and Asia were captivated. Rasputin hit #1 in Germany, the UK, Australia, and dozens of other countries. It remains one of the most streamed disco songs on Spotify today, a testament to the fact that a great groove transcends language, politics, and even historical accuracy. Song number 7, Celebration, Kool and the Gang. Kool and the Gang started as a jazz-funk instrumental band in the late 1960s. It wasn't until they added vocalist James J.T. Taylor in 1979 that they crossed into disco superstardom. Celebration was written to capture the feeling of a party that never stops, and it worked so well that it became the official theme song for the 1981 NBA Finals, the return of the American hostages from Iran, and approximately 1 million weddings since. But the band's journey to that moment was a long one. Robert "Kool" Bell founded the group in 1964 in Jersey City, New Jersey, originally calling them the Jazziacs. They spent years playing jazz and funk instrumentals in clubs, building a reputation as a tight, musically gifted band that could play anything. By the mid-1970s, they had scored several R&B hits but had never crossed over to mainstream pop success. The addition of J.T. Taylor in 1979 changed everything. Taylor was a former schoolteacher who had been singing in nightclubs in New Jersey when Robert Bell heard him. His smooth, warm voice was exactly what the band needed to make the leap from funk instrumentalists to pop disco stars.
Celebrate good times, come on. Let's celebrate.
Celebration was written by Robert Bell, his brother Ronald Bell, and Eumir Deodato, the Brazilian arranger who had worked with Frank Sinatra and Roberta Flack. The song was conceived as a universal anthem, something that could be played at any joyful occasion, in any country, at any time. The horn arrangement, courtesy of Deodato, gave it a brightness and grandeur that elevated it above typical disco fare. When Celebration was released in late 1980, it shot to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 2 weeks. But its real legacy was cultural. The song became the go-to track for moments of collective joy, sports victories, political milestones, graduations, and yes, 1 million weddings. Ronald Bell once said that he wanted to write a song that made people feel like the whole world was celebrating together. 45 years later, that's exactly what it still does.
It's a celebration. Sitting here eating my heart out, waiting for some lover to come.
Song number 8, Hot Stuff, Donna Summer. Donna Summer was called the Queen of Disco for a reason. Hot Stuff was originally written as a rock-disco hybrid, and producer Giorgio Moroder brought in a session guitarist named Jeff Baxter, who had played with Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers, to lay down that searing guitar solo. The result was a genre bender that proved disco could be just as gritty and dangerous as rock and roll. But the full story of Hot Stuff reveals how Donna Summer was constantly pushing against the boundaries of what people expected from her. By 1979, Summer was the biggest female star in disco. She had scored multiple #1 hits with Love to Love You Baby, I Feel Love, and Last Dance, and she was under enormous pressure from her label to keep delivering the same formula. But Summer was restless. She had grown up listening to rock and roll, Janis Joplin, Creedence Clearwater Revival, the Rolling Stones, and she wanted to bring that energy into her music. Producer Giorgio Moroder, who had been her creative partner since the beginning, fully supported the direction.
I need hot stuff. I want some hot stuff.
Together they crafted Hot Stuff as a deliberate fusion, a disco beat with a rock guitar, a bass-driven groove with a bluesy vocal. Jeff Baxter was brought in specifically because he wasn't a disco guitarist. His rock credentials gave the track an authenticity that a session player couldn't have matched. The guitar solo he recorded was raw, loud, and slightly unhinged, exactly what the song needed. Summer's vocal was equally powerful. She growled, she whispered, she belted, sometimes all in the same line. The label was nervous about the rock elements, but Hot Stuff hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July 1979 and won the Grammy for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance, the first time a disco artist had won a rock Grammy. It was a statement. Disco didn't have to be soft, shiny, or disposable. It could be as raw and rebellious as anything in rock and roll, and Donna Summer was the artist bold enough to prove it. Chic was founded by Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards, two musicians who would go on to shape the sound of the 1980s, producing for David Bowie, Madonna, and Diana Ross. Le Freak was inspired by a night they were denied entry to Studio 54 for a Grace Jones party. The original lyrics were considerably more profane, F off instead of freak out. They cleaned it up, and the song became Atlantic Records' biggest-selling single ever. But the story of Chic is one of the most remarkable in all of popular music. Nile Rodgers was a session guitarist in New York who had played with everyone from Sesame Street's house band to the Apollo Theater's backing musicians. Bernard Edwards was a bassist with a similar background, a working musician who could play anything but hadn't yet found his own voice. When they met in 1972, they bonded instantly over a shared vision. They wanted to create music that was both sophisticated and accessible, music that made you think and dance at the same time. Chic was born from that vision. Their self-titled debut album in 1977 established them as one of the tightest, most musically accomplished bands in disco. But it was Le Freak that made them superstars. The song was written on December 31, 1977, after Rodgers and Edwards were turned away from Studio 54. They had been invited to a New Year's Eve party by Grace Jones, but the doorman refused to let them in. They went back to Edwards' apartment, furious, and channeled their anger into a song. The original chorus was a profane invitation to the doorman, but after sleeping on it, they replaced the expletive with freak out, a nod to the dance craze of the moment. The guitar riff, that iconic choppy upstroke pattern, was Rodgers' creation, and it's one of the most recognizable riffs in popular music. Edwards' bass line was equally masterful, a walking, syncopated groove that drove the song forward with relentless energy. Le Freak hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January 1979 and stayed there for 6 weeks. Longer than any other song that year. It sold over 6 million copies and became Atlantic Records' best-selling single of all time, a record it still holds. For Rodgers and Edwards, it was the beginning of a legacy that would reshape pop music for decades. Song number 10, YMCA, Village People. The Village People were assembled as a concept, a group representing gay subculture archetypes created by French producers Jacques Morali and Henri Belolo. YMCA was written in under 20 minutes. Henri Belolo later admitted he got the idea after noticing how many young men in Greenwich Village would hang out at the YMCA. The dance moves, the arm letters, were invented by the crowd on American Bandstand, not the band themselves. But the full story of the Village People is a fascinating mix of commerce, culture, and happy accidents. YMCA, it's fun to stay at the YMCA. Jacques Morali was a French composer who had moved to New York in the early 1970s and was immediately captivated by the energy of the gay disco scene in Greenwich Village. He noticed that the crowd at clubs like the Anvil and 12 West was full of larger-than-life characters. A construction worker, a cowboy, a leather-clad biker, a Native American in headdress, a police officer, a soldier. These were archetypes of gay culture, instantly recognizable to anyone who had spent time in that world. Morali, along with his partner Henri Belolo, had the idea of assembling a group that embodied these characters. The first member recruited was Felipe Rose, a Native American dancer of Lakota and Puerto Rican descent, who Morali spotted in full headdress at a club in the village. Victor Willis, a Broadway performer, was brought in as the lead vocalist and the police officer character. The remaining members were cast through auditions and connections in the New York theater and dance worlds. YMCA was the group's biggest hit, and its creation was almost absurdly fast. Morali and Belolo wrote the melody, and Victor Willis wrote the lyrics in under 20 minutes. The song's double meaning, the Young Men's Christian Association as both a legitimate community organization and a well-known cruising spot for gay men, was intentional and gave the song a subversive edge that went over the heads of mainstream audiences. When the Village People performed on American Bandstand, the audience spontaneously started spelling out the letters YMCA with their arms. The band adopted the moves, and the dance was born. YMCA hit number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1979 and has been a party staple ever since. It's one of the few songs in history where the dance is as famous as the music. Song number 11, We Are Family, Sister Sledge. We Are Family was recorded by Sister Sledge in 1979, produced again by Chic's Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards. Kathy Sledge was only 19 when she recorded the lead vocal. The song was written as a genuine tribute to the Sledge sisters' real family bond, and it became an accidental anthem for unity everywhere, from sports teams to civil rights movements. The Pittsburgh Pirates even adopted it as their theme song on their way to winning the 1979 World Series. But the full story reveals how close this song came to never existing. The Sledge sisters, Debbie, Joni, Kathy, and Kim, had been singing together since childhood in Philadelphia, the daughters of a Broadway tap dancer and a singer. They had released several singles throughout the 1970s on various labels, but had never achieved more than modest success. By 1978, they were considering disbanding. Then Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards, fresh off the massive success of Chic and Le Freak, were asked by their label to produce an album for Sister Sledge. Rodgers and Edwards were initially reluctant. They were focused on their own career. But they agreed to listen to the sisters sing. What they heard convinced them immediately. 4 voices that blended with a warmth and natural chemistry that couldn't be manufactured.
Everyone can see we're together as we walk on by.
Rodgers and Edwards wrote We Are Family in a single afternoon, drawing on the genuine closeness they observed between the 4 sisters. Kathy Sledge, the youngest at 19, was chosen to sing lead because her voice had a clarity and innocence that suited the song's message. She recorded her vocal in just 2 takes, and Rodgers has said that he barely had to give her any direction. She understood the emotion instinctively. The arrangement was classic Chic, a driving bass line, layered guitars, and shimmering strings that built to a joyous crescendo.
Living life is fun and we just begun to get our share of this world's deep.
When We Are Family was released in early 1979, it climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became an instant anthem. The Pittsburgh Pirates, who were fighting for the NL East title, started playing it in the clubhouse after wins. Captain Willie Stargell said the song captured the spirit of the team, a group of individuals from different backgrounds united by a common goal. The Pirates went on to win the 1979 World Series, and We Are Family became permanently associated with their championship run. But the song's reach went far beyond baseball. It was adopted as an anthem by the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and countless communities around the world. What Rodgers and Edwards had written as a tribute to 4 sisters became a universal statement of solidarity that still resonates today. Song number 12, Good Times, Chic. Good Times by Chic contains one of the most important bass lines in music history. Bernard Edwards' bass groove was so influential that it was directly sampled by the Sugar Hill Gang for Rapper's Delight, the first mainstream hip-hop hit. Queen, Blondie, and dozens of others borrowed from it too. In a very real sense, the DNA of modern hip-hop, pop, and electronic dance music can be traced back to this single 4-minute disco track. But the full magnitude of Good Times and its impact on music is almost hard to overstate. The song was recorded in 1979 at the Power Station in New York, one of the most prestigious recording studios in the world. Bernard Edwards played his bass line live in the studio, without any editing or overdubbing, in a single take. That bass line, a warm, walking, syncopated groove that seems to breathe and pulse with a life of its own, is widely considered one of the greatest bass performances ever committed to tape. Nile Rodgers' guitar work on the track is equally masterful, a choppy rhythmic pattern that locks in with the bass to create a groove so tight it feels like a single instrument. The lyrics were deliberately simple, a celebration of good times and dancing, but the production was anything but. Rodgers and Edwards spent days layering the strings, horns, and vocals to create a wall of sound that was both massive and crystal clear. When Good Times was released in the summer of 1979, it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the last great disco hits before the genre's commercial decline. But its true legacy was just beginning. In October 1979, a group called the Sugar Hill Gang released Rapper's Delight, the first rap record to reach a mass audience. The backing track was a direct lift of the Good Times bass line, played by a live band that replicated Edwards' groove note for note. When Chic heard it, they were initially furious. But Rodgers and Edwards quickly realized that the birth of hip-hop was something to be celebrated, not feared. They embraced the connection and even performed Good Times alongside hip-hop DJs at parties in the Bronx. In the years that followed, the Good Times bass line was sampled, interpolated, or referenced in hundreds of songs across hip-hop, house, techno, and pop. Blondie's Rapture, Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, and countless others drew from its DNA. Bernard Edwards passed away in 1996, but his bass line lives on every time a dance floor fills up anywhere in the world. Song number 13, Night Fever, Bee Gees. Night Fever was the Bee Gees' second contribution to the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, a soundtrack that would go on to sell over 40 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling albums of all time. The song was written specifically at the request of Robert Stigwood, who wanted something that captured the hypnotic, trance-like state of losing yourself on a dance floor at 2 a.m. The Bee Gees delivered it in a single afternoon, but the full story of Night Fever reveals how central the Bee Gees were to the entire Saturday Night Fever project, and how close the film came to having a completely different soundtrack. Robert Stigwood, the Australian-born producer who managed the Bee Gees, had acquired the rights to a New York Magazine article about the disco scene in Brooklyn, and was developing it into a film. He asked Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb to write the music before the film was even shot. The brothers retreated to a studio in France and began writing furiously, producing a remarkable string of songs in a matter of weeks. How Deep Is Your Love, Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, More Than a Woman, and If I Can't Have You, all written specifically for the film. Night Fever was perhaps the most atmospheric of the bunch. Barry Gibb has said that he wrote it with the image of a Brooklyn disco at 2 a.m. in mind, the strobe lights, the smoke machine, the hypnotic repetition of the beat, and the feeling of losing yourself completely in the music. The falsetto harmonies were layered meticulously, with Barry, Robin, and Maurice each recording their parts separately, and then blending them into the ethereal, otherworldly sound that became the song's signature. The string arrangement by Albi Galutin added a lushness that elevated the track beyond standard disco fare. When Saturday Night Fever premiered in December 1977, the soundtrack exploded. Night Fever hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in March 1978 and stayed there for 2 months. The Saturday Night Fever album spent 24 weeks at #1, a record that stood for decades. The Bee Gees, who had been written off as has-beens just 3 years earlier, were suddenly the biggest band in the world. Night Fever remains one of the most evocative disco songs ever recorded. A 4-minute journey into the heart of a 70s dance floor that still feels electric nearly 50 years later.
She's crazy like a fool.
Song number 14, Daddy Cool, Boney M. Boney M's Daddy Cool was their breakout hit in 1976, and it launched them from obscurity to European superstardom almost overnight. The song's distinctive whistle and chant intro was inspired by a 1950s doo-wop record that Frank Farian heard as a child in Germany. The track was initially rejected by every major UK label. Too weird, too European. Then it hit number 1 in 18 countries. But the full story of Boney M's rise is a fascinating tale of European pop engineering and the power of visual performance. Frank Farian had been a struggling solo artist in Germany when he decided to create a group that could compete with the American and British acts dominating European charts. The concept was simple. Find charismatic, attractive performers who could dance and front the group while Farian handled the studio production. Bobby Farrell, a dancer from Aruba who had been performing in clubs in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, was the first member cast. His stage presence was electrifying. He moved with a fluid, athletic energy that captivated audiences. Liz Mitchell, a Jamaican-born singer who had performed in the German production of Hair, was recruited as the lead female vocalist. Marsha Barrett and Maisie Williams completed the lineup. Daddy Cool was their first major single, and it was unlike anything else on European radio. The whistled intro, reportedly inspired by a 1950s American doo-wop record that Farian heard as a child growing up in a working-class family near Frankfurt, was haunting and immediately memorable. The chant of "She's crazy like a fool" was simple and infectious, and the driving disco beat gave it an energy that was impossible to resist. But every major UK label passed on it. They said it was too European, too strange, too far outside the Anglo-American pop mainstream. Then the song started climbing charts across Europe: Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Switzerland, Austria, and Scandinavia. It hit number 1 in 18 countries and eventually cracked the UK top 10. Boney M became one of the most successful groups in European history, selling over 100 million records. Daddy Cool remains their signature song, a track that proved you didn't need to be American or British to make a global disco hit.
He's crazy about her daddy. Oh, she believes in him.
Song 15, I Feel Love, Donna Summer. I Feel Love by Donna Summer wasn't just a disco song, it was a prophecy. Producer Giorgio Moroder used a Moog synthesizer to create a pulsing electronic bass line that had never been heard in popular music before. Brian Eno heard it and told David Bowie, "This is the future of music and I've heard it." He was right. Every electronic dance track made since 1977 owes something to this song. But the full story of I Feel Love reveals a moment of genuine revolution in the recording studio. By 1977, Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder had already achieved massive success with Love to Love You Baby, a 17-minute disco epic that had pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in popular music. But Moroder was restless. He had been experimenting with synthesizers, specifically the Moog modular system, a massive, room-filling instrument that required patch cables to create sound. The Moog was still a novelty in pop music, used mostly for textural effects and occasional solos. Moroder had a radical idea. What if the entire foundation of a song, the bass line, the rhythm, the pulse, was generated electronically? He worked with his engineer, Robbie Wadle, to program a sequencer that would produce a continuous, hypnotic, repeating bass line. The sound was cold, mechanical, and utterly unlike anything being played by a human bassist. But it had a quality that no live performance could replicate: perfect, relentless precision. Over that electronic foundation, Moroder layered a kick drum, a synthesized snare, and shimmering electronic textures. Donna Summer's vocal was the only acoustic element, a breathy, ethereal performance that floated above the electronic landscape. The contrast between the warm human voice and the cold, mechanical instrumentation was revolutionary. When Pete Bellotte, Marauder's co-producer, heard the final mix, he said it sounded like music from another planet. Brian Eno, visiting David Bowie at his studio in Berlin, played the track and reportedly said, "I have heard the future of music, and this is it." Bowie agreed, and the two incorporated electronic elements into their own work, most notably on Heroes and Lodger. I Feel Love hit #1 on the UK chart. TS and reached #6 in the US. But its real impact was on the future. The song's electronic bass line became the template for house music, techno, trance, and virtually every form of electronic dance music that followed. Giorgio Moroder, without knowing it, had invented the sound of the next 40 years. Fire. September by Earth, Wind and Fire was written in a single night. Maurice White, Al McKay, and Ali Willis locked themselves in a studio and didn't leave until it was done. The specific date in the lyrics, the 21st night of September, was chosen simply because it sounded good. But fans have debated its significance for decades. Ali Willis once said, "I've been asked what happened on September 21st more than I've been asked about my own birthday. But the full story of September is a masterclass in how great songs are made, not through careful planning, but through instinct, chemistry, and a willingness to follow a feeling wherever it leads." Ali Willis was a songwriter who had written for Bonnie Raitt and the Carpenters, but she had never worked with a band like Earth, Wind and Fire. When Maurice White invited her to collaborate, she was intimidated. Earth, Wind and Fire was one of the most musically sophisticated bands in the world, and Willis described herself as a white girl from Detroit who wrote pop songs. But White saw something in her writing, a directness and emotional honesty that he wanted to bring into the band's sound. The session that produced September started as a casual writing date. White, Willis, and guitarist Al McKay sat in a studio and began playing around with a chord progression that McKay had been working on. Willis started singing nonsense syllables over the top, ba-de-ya, and White loved it. He told her to keep it. Willis protested, "We can't put ba-de-ya in the song, it doesn't mean anything." White insisted, "It doesn't have to mean anything, it has to feel good." That philosophy, feeling over meaning, groove over logic, drove the entire session. The date September 21st was chosen because it scanned well rhythmically, not because anything specific happened on that date. Willis spent years being asked about the significance of the date by fans, journalists, and even historians. She eventually admitted, "I still don't know what happened on September 21st. Nothing. We just liked the way it sounded." The horn arrangement, one of the most joyous in all of popular music, was written by Tom 84, Earth, Wind and Fire's longtime arranger. The horns enter after the second verse and lift the song to a level of pure euphoria. Maurice White's production was meticulous. Every element, the bass, the guitar, the horns, the vocals, the kalimba, had its own space in the mix, and nothing clashed. September was released in November 1978 and reached #1 on the Billboard R&B chart and #8 on the Hot 100. But its real legacy was cultural. It became one of the most played songs at weddings, parties, and celebrations for the next 4 decades. In 2018, September was added to the Library of Congress National Recording Registry, one of the few disco-era songs to receive that honor. Ali Willis, who passed away in 2019, said that of all the songs she wrote in her career, September was the one she was most proud of. Not because it was the most complex or the most sophisticated, but because it made people happy. Every time. KC and the Sunshine Band were the unsung heroes of 1970s dance music. Harry Wayne Casey, KC, was a record warehouse employee in Miami before he convinced label owner Henry Stone to let him record. Shake Your Booty was originally dismissed as too simplistic. But that was the point. Casey deliberately wrote hooks so simple that anyone could sing them after one listen. The strategy worked. The song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But the full story of KC and the Sunshine Band is a remarkable tale of ambition, hustle, and the Miami music scene. Harry Wayne Casey was born in Hialeah, Florida, a working-class suburb of Miami. He was a record obsessive from childhood, spending every spare dollar he had on vinyl. In his early 20s, he got a job at TK Records, a small independent label in Miami run by Henry Stone. Casey started in the warehouse, stocking shelves and shipping orders. But he spent every free minute in the studio, watching producers and engineers work, learning everything he could about how records were made. He started experimenting with his own recordings, using TK's studio after hours. Henry Stone was initially skeptical. Casey had no formal music training and couldn't read music, but he gave him a chance. Casey's philosophy was simple and deliberate. He believed that the best dance songs were the ones that anyone could sing along to immediately. He studied the hits that worked at clubs and parties, songs like Rock the Boat and Rock Your Baby, and noticed that they all shared a common element, a simple, repetitive, instantly memorable hook. He set out to write songs that distilled that principle to its purest form. Shake Your Booty was the ultimate expression of that philosophy. The title was a common slang phrase in African-American vernacular English that had been around for years. The lyrics were almost absurdly minimal. Shake, 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 shake your booty, repeated over a driving, brass-heavy groove. Critics dismissed it as moronic. But Casey didn't care. He wasn't writing for critics. He was writing for the dance floor. The track featured the Sunshine Band, a group of Miami musicians that Casey had assembled, including a tight horn section and a rhythm section that locked into a groove so deep you couldn't help but move. When Shake Your Booty was released in 1976, it shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, Casey and the Sunshine Band's third chart topper in 2 years. The song's simplicity was its genius. In an era of increasingly complex disco productions, Casey proved that a great dance record didn't need elaborate arrangements or sophisticated lyrics. It needed a groove you could feel in your body and a hook you could sing after one listen. That philosophy would influence dance music for decades, from house to hip-hop to electronic pop. Every time a producer writes a simple, repetitive, infectious hook and says, "Less is more," they're channeling KC and the Sunshine Band. Song number 18, Turn the Beat Around, Vicki Sue Robinson. Turn the Beat Around by Vicki Sue Robinson was recorded in a single take at 3 a.m. after a grueling studio session. Robinson was a Broadway performer who had never had a hit record. She nearly passed out from exhaustion during the vocal, and that raw, desperate energy is exactly what made the track explode. It reached #10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a dance floor staple that Gloria Estefan would later cover to massive success. But the full story of Turn the Beat Around is one of perseverance, raw talent, and the magic that can happen when everything aligns at the right moment. Vicki Sue Robinson was born in Harlem and raised in a musical family. Her mother was a professional singer, and Vicki Sue was performing on Broadway by the age of 16. She appeared in the original Broadway production of Hair and later in Jesus Christ Superstar. But her dream was always to have a hit record. She had been recording demos and performing in clubs around New York for years without success. In 1975, she was introduced to producers Gerald Jackson and Peter Hawke, who had written a song called Turn the Beat Around. The song was a celebration of music itself, a meta-disco anthem about the power of rhythm to transform and uplift. Robinson recorded it at Media Sound Studios in New York, a legendary facility where everyone from John Lennon to Donna Summer had recorded.
And when the drummer starts beating that beat, beating out that beat, a better rhythm with the rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat on the drum.
The session was long and grueling. Robinson had been recording for hours, working through different takes and arrangements, when the producers decided to try one final version at 3 a.m. By that point, Robinson was exhausted. She had been singing for nearly 6 hours straight, and her voice was ragged. But when the tape rolled, something extraordinary happened. She dug deep, pushed through the exhaustion, and delivered a vocal that was raw, urgent, and electrifying. The fatigue in her voice gave it an edge that a fresh, rested performance never could have. The producers knew immediately that this was the take. Robinson's vocal was layered over a dense, percussive arrangement that featured congas, timbales, and a driving brass section. The song's lyrics, "Turn the beat around, love to hear the percussion," were a literal celebration of the rhythmic elements that made disco so infectious. When Turn the Beat Around was released in early 1976, it climbed to number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a staple of dance clubs across America. Robinson finally had her hit, but it would be her only major chart success. She continued performing and recording for the rest of her career, and she provided backing vocals for artists like Whitney Houston and Irene Cara. Gloria Estefan recorded a faithful cover of Turn the Beat Around in 1994 that introduced the song to a new generation. Vicki Sue Robinson passed away in 2000, but her 3 a.m. performance lives on. A reminder that sometimes the best art comes not from when you're at your best, but from when you're pushed to your absolute limit. Song number 19, You Should Be Dancing, Bee Gees. You Should Be Dancing marked a turning point for the Bee Gees. It was the first time Barry Gibb used his now iconic falsetto as the lead vocal rather than a backing harmony. The song was recorded at the legendary Criteria Studios in Miami, where the brothers would work through the night and sleep on studio couches. The track's driving rhythm and percussion-heavy arrangement made it one of the most physically demanding songs they ever performed. Barry once said it left him gasping for air on stage. But the full story of You Should Be Dancing reveals how the Bee Gees' move to Miami transformed their sound and set the stage for their disco dominance. After their early success as a folk-pop group in the late 1960s, the Bee Gees had drifted apart and reformed several times. By 1975, they were searching for a new direction. Barry Gibb had begun experimenting with falsetto, singing in a register above his natural range, but only as a backing element. The brothers were invited to record at Criteria Studios in Miami by producer Arif Mardin, a Turkish-born arranger who had worked with Aretha Franklin, Hall & Oates, and Chaka Khan. Mardin recognized that the Bee Gees' sound needed to evolve, and he encouraged Barry to use his falsetto as a lead vocal rather than a backing element. Barry was initially hesitant. Singing in falsetto felt exposing, almost like a stunt. But Mardin insisted, and when Barry recorded the vocal for You Should Be Dancing, the result was electrifying. The falsetto gave the song a soaring, euphoric quality that was unlike anything the Bee Gees had recorded before. The production at Criteria Studios was equally transformative. The Gibb brothers fell in love with Miami and effectively moved into the studio, working through the night and sleeping on couches in the lounge. Criteria was one of the best-equipped studios in America, with a custom console and acoustics that gave recordings a warmth and clarity that was hard to replicate elsewhere. The percussion on You Should Be Dancing was particularly elaborate. The brothers layered multiple drum tracks, congas, and shakers to create a dense, polyrhythmic groove that drove the song forward with relentless energy. When You Should Be Dancing was released in 1976, it hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, their first American chart topper in years. The song became a centerpiece of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and its high-energy arrangement made it a favorite in clubs. But performing it live was another matter. Barry Gibb's falsetto required enormous breath control, and the song's driving tempo demanded physical stamina. Barry once said that singing You Should Be Dancing on stage left him gasping for air. He would finish the song bent over, trying to catch his breath. The song marked the moment the Bee Gees became a dance band, and the moment Barry Gibb's falsetto became one of the most recognizable voices in the history of popular music. Song number 20, Don't Stop, Till You Get Enough. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was just 20 years old when he recorded Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, his first solo single as an adult. Quincy Jones produced the album, but it was Michael who wrote this song himself, humming the melody into a tape recorder at home. The young Jackson was so nervous about the falsetto vocal that he nearly scrapped the entire session. Quincy Jones convinced him to push through. The result won Michael his first solo Grammy and planted the seed for everything Thriller would become. But the full story of this song is the story of a young man stepping out of the shadow of his family and finding his own voice. Literally. Michael Jackson had been a star since childhood, first with the Jackson 5 and then as a solo artist on Motown. But by the late 1970s, he was eager to establish himself as an adult artist with creative control over his own music. He had signed with Epic Records, a division of CBS, and his first album for the label, Off the Wall, was to be produced by Quincy Jones, whom Michael had met on the set of the Wiz film. Jones gave Michael an unprecedented level of creative freedom for a young artist. He encouraged him to write his own songs, something Motown had rarely allowed. Michael wrote, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough by humming the melody into a tape recorder at his home in Encino, California. He then brought the demo to Jones and the studio musicians, and together they built the arrangement around his original idea. The song's structure was ambitious, a long building intro that gives way to a driving disco groove, with Michael's vocal climbing from a spoken intro into a soaring falsetto. But when it came time to record the lead vocal, Michael froze. He had never sung in falsetto on a record before, and he was terrified it sounded wrong. Too high, too strange, too different from anything the public expected from him. He asked Quincy Jones if he could scrap the take and start over. Jones listened back to what Michael had recorded and told him firmly, This is your voice, this is who you are, don't change it. Michael trusted Jones, pushed through his fear, and delivered a vocal that was unlike anything he had recorded before. The falsetto was smooth, confident, and sensual, a sound that would become his signature for the rest of his career. The production on Don't Stop Till You Get Enough was lavish. Layered strings, wah-wah guitar, intricate percussion, and a bass line that drove the song forward with relentless energy. Louis Johnson of the Brothers Johnson played bass, and Greg Fillinganes contributed keyboards. When the song was released in July 1979, it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, Michael's first solo #1 single. It won him his first solo Grammy Award and the American Music Award for Favorite Soul R&B Single. But more importantly, it was the moment Michael Jackson declared himself as a solo artist of enormous ambition and talent. Off the Wall sold over 20 million copies, and the success of Don't Stop Till You Get Enough gave Michael the confidence to push even further. His next album, 3 years later, would be Thriller, the best-selling album of all time. But the seed for everything that followed was planted in a studio in Los Angeles in 1979, when a 20-year-old kid overcame his fear, trusted his producer, and sang in a voice the world had never heard before. And there you have it, 20 songs that defined a decade, remixed for a new generation. The 1970s didn't just give us disco, they gave us a feeling that no matter what was happening in the world, you could always find your way to a dance floor and lose yourself in the music. That feeling never died, and thanks to you, it never will. If you love this trip back to the golden era of disco, do me a massive favor, hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring the little bell so you never miss a new remix. We've got more 70s classics, 80s anthems, and golden oldies coming every single week. Until next time, keep dancing.